Oh my god.
Resident Evil 1 is a game I've hated for years. I played it once back in 2014 for 15 minutes and gave up on it. It was old, clunky, and weird. It felt like a game blinded by nostalgia. When I played it, I was about 16, maybe 15, and I hated it because it wasn't like Resident Evil 5 or 6. So then why did I want to play this game after all these years? Well, I don't really know. I just wanted to give it a shot, and I'm glad I did because I ended up loving it. I loved it so much that I went back to the original 1996 version thanks to GOG's Classic Collection, and I finished a run there as well. I got so wrapped up in the game that I started reading into the development and how crazy it was. So how did it start? Well, before I do that, most of the information found was using Project Umbrella, the wiki, and the book Itchy Tasty, An Unofficial History of Resident Evil by Alex and Niel, and a lot of other bits and pieces. Links in bio. Before I get into the game, I have to talk about one person in particular, a producer, designer, Tukuro Fujiwara. He joined Capcom in 1983 after working at Konami on 2 games. During his time at Capcom, he would soon become a figurehead for quite a few particular titles, such as Ghosts and Goblins, Mega Man 2, Goof Troop, and a plethora of other Capcom classics. Fujiwara was one of Capcom's driving forces, helping the company evolve from being known primarily for action games to diversifying its portfolio throughout the 80s. But one title that would fully immerse him would be 1989's SweetHome, a movie tie-in game on the Famicom. Both set to release on the same day, SweetHome tells the story of 5 filmmakers exploring an abandoned art mansion searching for valuable paintings to restore and publish, all while documenting the process. However, the longer they stay within a mansion, phenomenal events start to occur, with the crew succumbing to betrayal and death. The game, however, took quite a few liberties, expanding on the plot and diverging away from the film, which at the time was unprecedented. But both director and producer of the film, Kiyoshi Kurosawa and Juzo Itami, wanted it that way, with Kiyoshi Kurosawa supervising the game with Tukuro Fujiwara. The game itself was an RPG with random encounters. It was notable for having first-person combat segments against ghosts and other monsters, but the more interesting aspect about it was the divergence of the plot and its themes, in which would go help shape Resident Evil. The 5 filmmakers each have unique abilities and limited items. Players must backtrack to earlier areas to solve puzzles using items found later. And during the course of the movie, characters die, but the game would have you able to save them, altering the events. If failing to save any one of the 5 filmmakers, the game doesn't end, it continues, and by the end you get one of 5 endings depending on who makes it out alive. And as the game had released, despite how ambitious it was, SweetHome was a commercial failure. It had taken longer in development than most games with a 2-year production. Remember, this was a time where games took about 3, 6, 9 months at top, so a 2-year production was kinda crazy, and it faced limited market scope. The game was never released in the West due to the NES's family image, and with the game having gruesome imagery, it was off the table. At least, that's the general consensus.
So to please the kids, they line up at the few stores that have been able to get copies of the hottest Nintendo games, Mario 2 and The Adventure of Link.
I have Super Mario Bros. 2.
Now what's Nintendo, you ask, and why should you care? Well, I think it's something you should know about because it's captured America's children. School bus drivers report the kids are talking less about clothes and sports and what Joe did to Jane, and more about...
When you get to those things that go up and down, you just jump on them.
after school.
But despite the failure, it did well critically. And Tukuro never believed it was a waste of time and instead took it as a learning experience, but wanted to continue with the horror genre and wanted to remake SweetHome with a larger scope and a vision he was satisfied with. But with the limited hardware on the Famicom, he had to wait till his vision could be envisioned. Enter 1990. By this point, Tukuro had witnessed the growing 3D game scene from the SNES's Star Fox to Sega Mega Drive's Virtua Fighter, where he soon believed that the next generation of consoles, his SweetHome remake, could finally become a reality. He had experimented with the SNES but ultimately dropped the project as 3D was still too limited. That was until the bombshell, the Sony PlayStation. During Tokyo Game Show 1991, Sony shook up the market with a cheaper, higher quality disc-based system instead of cartridges. And with Nintendo's next system nowhere to be found, Tukuro believed this was his chance for his dream project to exist. Only, he wasn't a developer anymore, and instead a full-time producer, guiding younger developers to take leadership positions to gain experience. While he had ideas on how a SweetHome remake could be envisioned, he couldn't find a successor with both old leadership leaving and newcomers being too inexperienced. That is until a young Shinji Mikami entered the picture. The year 1993.
Street Fighter 2 Turbo スーパーファミコンで新発売 CAPCOM.
Tukuro had been trying years to get his SweetHome remake off the ground, but the license had expired, so he had taken the same core identity to create something new. And as the 16-bit era was flourishing, he had worked with and oversighted newcomer Shinji Mikami. And as he had, Tukuro was impressed by Mikami's work ethic and game design. And so Tukuro gave Mikami the opportunity to work on his own horror game, inspired by SweetHome. Enthusiastically, Mikami agreed, and for the next 6 months, Mikami was working, planning, and structuring the game alone, with Tukuro leading his direction and mentorship when needed. Originally, the game was to have ghosts and other spiritual enemies mimicking SweetHome, but that didn't seem fun or thrilling, so after some thought, Mikami recalled the movie that he had seen and thought about how scared it made him feel. That movie being George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. Mikami wanted to recreate that feeling of dread, but also wanted a set of characters who could make it out alive. But he wanted the player to achieve that sense of survival. Soon after, he had come to realize what the game could or should be. 9 months in, Mikami had a team size of 15, and Capcom needed a code name for the project. Mikami selected Biohazard to reflect the game's themes and setting. Soon after, the team continued to expand to a substantial 50 members, with some notable figures emerging. With the core team, they had started working on ideas Mikami envisioned, such as having the camera be first person, like in SweetHome. But that seemed too taxing on the PlayStation, so Mikami recalled 1992's Alone in the Dark, where he noted the idea for the camera angles. He found that it gave off a sense of dread and a cinematic style he was looking for. Next, the controls. The decision to use tank controls was a deliberate one. Around this time, Tukuro Fujiwara had less of a presence on Biohazard as he was mentoring rather than managing, and so Yoshiki Okamoto stepped in as the game's second producer for budget, milestones, and to oversee the team at a higher level. In doing so, the first task he assigned was to have the team choose if they were going to stick with the tank controls or real time. The dev team struggled to choose, but ultimately tank controls won due to the scare factor. The idea of not knowing what was around the corner and having limited movement made it seem more intense. But this seemed to be an issue, as often the developers could hear a zombie but not locate them. So auto aim was added in, but the developers also noted in the West, renting games was a huge market.
I said clean up your room. This isn't a game.
Son, the yard's not done. Do you think this is a game?
No way, but this is. Blockbuster Video gives you more action, more challenges, the newest and hottest video games you crave.
In my day, life was a challenge, not a game.
Well, now it's both at Blockbuster Video, where the challenge never ends.
And so they didn't want players to beat the game quickly. To compromise, remove auto aim for the West. They did bring it back when the game was re-released with the director's cut, but more on that later. A few other changes brought under Yoshiki Okamoto would be to change increments from 1 to 3, as he noted players would be spending half their time looking for them rather than playing the game. He made other decisions as well, but they're not as notable. But what should be noted is, despite Shinji Mikami being influenced by Dawn of the Dead, it was Kenishi Iwao, the scenario writer for Biohazard, who made the game memorable with its lore and story. He joined the development for the game midway and was confused on where it was heading. Originally, there were no humans in the game, just cyborgs and a mad scientist who were doing freakish experiments. He ended up having to redo the entire story of the game and redesigning the characters by giving them definitive roles. Shinji Mikami and the other developers were more in tune with the gameplay over story, but without a good story, there's no hook, which was Kenishi Iwao's thought process. And so, by late 1995, the game was at its final stage, but the name Biohazard could not be used in the West, as an American punk band had the same name, so the Western marketing division for Capcom brainstormed ideas, and a few days later, they came up with the name Resident Evil.
And I had a small hand in naming Resident Evil, actually. So at that time, when that was early 90s, there was a PC game that was out called Biohazard. And so I brought that up to the person who ran marketing in the US at the time. I said, hey, we won't be able to get a trademark for this. There's already a game called Biohazard in the US. We're going to have to change the name, because that was something we did in the 90s, was we changed the names of Japanese games and we changed the characters and stuff all the time. And she said, okay, what are we going to call it? And I said, I don't know. She said, what should we do? I said, well, we have all these creative people. Let's have a contest. And we'll have people submit names, and then we'll vote on the favorite name. And one of the guys who was in the very early dev team in the US came up with Resident Evil because he thought it was a funny pun, and everybody else thought it was a funny pun. And I won't lie, I thought it was the dumbest name. I was like, we can't call it this. It's so dumb. I'm like, hey, what if the next game isn't in a house? How is that going to make any sense? And they're like, shut up, Kramer. And here we are.
The name was selected, and soon after, the game was to be marketed. As development drew to a close, it faced several significant challenges. Capcom was nearing bankruptcy due to high production costs and the increasingly need for more developers on a single project. As a result, the company's higher-ups consulted their American consulting firm, which recommended cancelling Biohazard. Many within Capcom, including numerous developers and managers, believed this was inevitable. But this wasn't done out of malice. Instead, Japan and its whole economy was facing a financial crisis known as a lost generation. Only the GOAT, Tukuro Fujiwara, pleaded that it be spared and published. His goal to diversify Capcom's gaming division from 1982 to then 1995 was a decade-old dream, but he knew that everyone who had worked on Biohazard believed in the project and it would be something worth fighting for. And so the game was given a final go-ahead, and on March 22nd, 1996 in Japan and March 30th, 1996 in North America, Resident Evil launched on the PlayStation to critical acclaim. It became a massive success, selling 2.75 million copies worldwide, breaking new ground for Capcom and the industry as a whole. What began as a passion project would grow into a series that will become a franchise, and a franchise that will leave an everlasting mark on gaming history. Soon after, Tukuro Fujiwara left Capcom in 1996, establishing his own company, Whoopee Camp. And by 2002, a remake of 1996 Resident Evil was given a remake under Shinji Mikami as a bigger, scarier version that was more aligned to his original vision. And by 2014, that version will be brought back as a remaster. And that's how Resident Evil got started. And that's far from where it goes and far from what I want to talk about. I know there's a lot of development changes, but I don't think that's necessary to talk about in this. If you want to do that, there's some other videos, please check them out. Anyway, with the game's success, Capcom took notice of the handheld market and announced an outsourced support to UK studios Hot Gen on the Game Boy, intended for a 1999 release. It later got pushed to the 2000s before it was eventually canned and replaced with Resident Evil Gaiden, a non-canon Resident Evil 2 spin-off. A cancelled port of the Hot Gen version was actually found and restored and is fully playable not that long ago. And years later, it was once again re-released for the original DS with the title Resident Evil Deadly Silence. It follows the original 1996 release with some additional content. And as for the director's cut, the main thing that changed in it was the music. After the game was all but finished, during the director's cut, Mamoru Samaguchi joined the Resident Evil team and altered some of the music, which went on to be hated as it sounds like clowns farting. It's no good, but as for the gameplay, it's actually a lot better. And there was actually one more version of Resident Evil around this time that was ported to the Sega Saturn. This version of the game is more or less the same, with some additional content that could have been made on the PSX. But otherwise, I quite like it a lot as it has a unique charm to it. It has this like really nice pixelated look to it. I don't know how to describe it. I think it looks gorgeous. But outside of all of that, I think it just shows how important it is to have a figurehead like Tukuro Fujiwara. Someone who believes in the project all the way through and understood what exactly he wanted. But it wasn't just Tukuro Fujiwara, he was open to having his ideas changed and interpreted by other people. Shinji Mikami could have easily recreated Tukuro Fujiwara's vision to have a one-to-one remake of SweetHome. But instead he took his ideas and changed them to his own. He was influenced by something else, and while Shinji Mikami wasn't the greatest writer, and that's where people like Kenishi Iwao come in, another person to come in and interpret their vision to this vision that they were working towards. In a creative space like this, is never a single person who can do everything. It's multiple people. In any case, that's it. I'll leave the thoughts there. Now it's time for the review. Let's go, baby. Going in, I had no expectations with the originals. I didn't know anything about them. The only things I know about Resident Evil are 4, 5, 6, and 7 and some of the movies. But outside of that, everything else is completely fresh to me. And I never touched the originals because of the static camera. With that said, for the original, I used a few graphical mods to remove the pixelization, but nothing else. With that, let's start. Outside Raccoon City, a string of murders and cannibalistic attacks have left people missing. The Special Tactics and Rescue Service, or STARS, heads into the mountains. But as Alpha Team enters, Bravo Team had disappeared. As Alpha Team is sent to investigate, the mission quickly goes wrong. They are attacked by a pack of rabid dogs, scattering the team, with the helicopter they arrived in leaving them behind. They escape into a nearby mansion with a few remaining survivors: Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, and the captain, Albert Wesker. Cut off from help and low on supplies, they must uncover the mansion's secret and find a way out. Before I could love the game, I have to talk about how I hated it at first. As I started the game and got past the intro cutscene, I felt confused and underwhelmed. I'd been here before and I knew what to expect. This mansion felt confusing and underwhelming. The camera sucks ass. Why was it consistently changing as I moved? And that first zombie you encounter, I guess it's scary, but I ran away from it with ease. And later when gaining the map, I was bored. And then, eventually, your teammates go missing, and you're alone. Much more alone than I remember. For me, this is when the game finally started to settle in, and I became immersed. Not so much that I was a fan yet, but I started to get a feeling for what this game had to offer. Only it didn't last very long. As I continued exploring the mansion, I was more confused than ever. I found a grave outside and had no clue what it was for. Later I picked up an item that clearly matched it, ran back and tried to use it. Nothing. So I explored every room again and again. Nothing. I eventually gave in and looked up a walkthrough, and that's when I realized the problem. You have to actually examine the item before the game lets you use it. Why? That made me angry. I never had to do something that specific in any modern video game. That is so annoying. But after that moment, I finally understood what the game was and what it expected from me. I went in thinking it would meet me on my terms, but instead I had to meet it on its terms. Once I accepted that, everything changed. I could not put the controller down and I kept thinking about the game in a way I had never done before. It was an addictive experience. After which, I finished it, loved it, and moved on to the original, where I was surprised by how similar and different it was. But that only happened when I got over the fixed camera angles and controls. I still don't particularly love them, especially with the original. The characters felt slow and clunky. It's the true definition of tank controls. It got less annoying when I got a flow for it, but I never felt like I was fully in control, often hoping I made the right choice. The remake, on the other hand, was amazing. It's much tighter and more precise. I felt like I understood exactly what the game wanted from me. And once I started exploring the mansion, I was and still am genuinely blown away with how gorgeous it is. The lighting and color grading in each area is unmatched. I didn't realize how creative the framing of shots were either. It would have been so easy for the camera to be static and purely functional because of the limitations. Instead, so much of the mansion has an ominous tone and uncomfortable tension, like something has gone wrong. But it's not only the camera, it's also the sound design. I always felt uncomfortable due to how the audio and the framing was set up. Through an earlier scene, as you're heading up a set of stairs, there's nothing around you. And as you move further down the hallway, you start to notice the creaking floorboards and your own heavy footsteps. It all feels ambient, like something is about to happen, but nothing does. Then later, when you eventually make your way back through that same area, the scene has changed. There are crows now, and they're in a frenzy mood, squawking loudly, as if something has gone wrong, and it's anxiety inducing. Good, we got another zombie. That's so scary. Moments like this were incredible, and is one of many examples where the sound and framing create tension without ever needing a jump scare. Both versions are incredible at this idea on showing and not telling, and so much of that is because of how sparingly the music is used. So much of my time was spent going through silence until the music is amplified, where I'm in a high stress situation emulating what the characters are facing. And that only works because of the situation the characters are in. What is this mansion? Who built it and why? What happened to Bravo Team and where did our teammates go? There's so much mystery that pulled me into the unknown, digging into the secrets this mansion holds. The problem It's a rabbit hole. The deeper you go, the worse it gets. The mansion and its estate are a messy maze thrown together to keep secrets hidden. From notes left behind about the lives once lived here to the experiments that slowly tore those lives apart, the vibe from both versions surprised me with how much was changed. The remake is traditional horror with atmospheric dread, with the mansion having felt lived in and shaped by the events that came before you, with darker tones and heavy use of shadows creating tension. Whereas the original felt more liminal, like this mansion shouldn't exist and the space around it having a feeling of strangeness. Is bright and clean but abandoned? We see aspects of this house lived in, but has it? It's too clean, it's too empty, it feels organized, as if that's part of the mystery. Both versions have beautiful scenery, with each area being distinct from each other. While the original lacks in shadows and details, it makes up with having the mansion rooms and areas around it distinct with the color grading. Whereas the remake takes that same idea and expands on it while adding to the mystery of death and destruction that brought you here. And as gameplay goes, they are vastly different experiences. Having played the remake first, I was blown away with how the remake captured what the original was but expanded on it without any of it feeling like it was padded in. I never felt like the remake overstayed its welcome. And what I found most intriguing by the end of the remake is, after having played quite a few modern Resident Evil games, none of them seem to have this feeling of dread and emptiness. There's something special about the first game, something that I hope continues in the second and third, but that said, while I love my playthrough of the original, I felt like it was missing quite a bit that added to the overall feeling of what I loved about the remake. One of which was the mansion. In the remake, it's an estate, it's huge. I loved the new areas that you had to go through. It added to the mystery of what was to come and felt more interconnected, like how a real building would be. So much of the original left me baffled, wondering why certain rooms felt strange because of how small they were. That isn't to say I was upset, but entering a new area thinking it will be bigger than it was and then having no reason to return once finished made the experience feel disconnected. That said, I love the structure of how both games were designed, where at first the map is a necessity to understand this maze of confusion where nothing makes sense. But after going through it once, I understood exactly where I had to go and what to do. I loved how each area was crafted with the player in mind. You never had to get certain equipment to progress, as long as you know what to do. And that carries over into the puzzles. I was genuinely baffled by them. What I once thought was hard to understand and confusing turned out to be insanely fun, making me seriously think about how certain puzzles worked. And I was shocked to discover that many of my favorite puzzles in the remake weren't part of the original, but instead have their own fun take on them. But then some other puzzles are the exact same. I would love to know how they went about what to change and what to keep. Adding to this, what was a standout to me when replaying the game a second time was how different Chris and Jill were with how they faced the mansion. Chris is someone who is headstrong and can face danger with little worry, only he's not great at puzzles, and you learn that he can't read sheet music or do any chemistry. Whereas Jill is the opposite, she's great at puzzles, but she can't make the same mistakes Chris can. And she's more durable to damage, so others need to help her if she's going guns blazing. What also was a surprise was who the campaign partner were. Jill with Barry and Chris with Rebecca, both of whom are also completely different, leading to different scenarios. Rebecca is this naive STARS member who only joined a year ago.
Wait a minute! Who are you?
I don't know what Resident Evil 0 is exactly, but I know a little bit about it thanks to some of the research I was doing, and it's weird. Okay, hear me out. Resident Evil 0 is a game that was made with the same engine. Ignore it though. It was made years after Resident Evil 1, and they reckon Rebecca to have faced the zombies before, only it makes no sense. I don't know much about it, but it sounds bad. Anyway, Rebecca's whole squad was killed, and being the sole survivor, she's vulnerable, but has to step up and join Chris, escape. Whereas Barry, he's almost a father figure, guiding and helping Jill whenever he can, but also facing a double-edged sword that he's forced into. It was fun going through the two campaigns and seeing what made the characters so different. It was a delight knowing that Capcom, even with the 1996 version, took the time to make the campaign so different. and the two campaigns are more or less the same, only the vibe has changed. The remake is more serious with new dialogue and voice acting, whereas the original, while good, the delivery is a bit corny and it sounds kinda like an 80s porno.
Wait, what is that?
My interpretation is off a little. Chris, may I practice for a while?
See? Just relax and play.
All right.
Oh, what was that?
My interpretation is off a little. Let me practice for a while.
Sure. But don't get too carried away.
Oh, I won't.
I warn you, though. It's not pretty. It's forest.
What could have done this to him?
God only knows, but I'm gonna find out what did this to him.
But just take a look at this. It's forest. Oh my God.
It's awful.
I'm going to find out what caused Forrest's death. It looks like he was killed by a crow or something.
From what I found, it was actually intentional. The voice actors got a lot of flack for it, but that was the direction they were given. The remake is a lot better for what the story was and how the characters were to act. The original is fun in a campy way. I wouldn't want it to be overly serious. How could you with the type of intro it had? It was badass. It made all the characters look sick as hell. Resident Evil. Ah, this is kind of amazing. And with that, Jill and Chris are an incredible duo. While they don't interact much throughout the story, you can tell the kind of bond they had for each other when they do. And if Capcom weren't such cowards with their protags being virginless heroes, I'll be so down for Chris and Jill to be a power couple. Clearly they have a vibe going on, so why didn't Capcom commit? I have no idea. And it will be hard to talk about Resident Evil without my king, Wesker, and knowing what he turns into. He's this badass suave mother who looks out for himself and is always in the right place, and somehow always able to get away with his bullshit. But it's fantastic knowing that he was always the scumbag. But he's so cool that you can forgive him. It's not hard to figure out that he's the baddie, but his reasonings is still masked in mystery, and it's surprising knowing that Resident Evil was never to be a franchise. But knowing how huge it got shows how much more they wanted to do with him. And when RE5 is to get a remake, I would love for Sheva to return, but at some point be replaced with Jill, knowing the connection she and Chris have to him. With that, the overall story with RE1 isn't all that, but his mystery is what kept me hooked, and it's fantastic. But outside of that, what I love about the remake is the additional content that the original never had. Like the new lore that alludes to what took place within the mansion. It's horrific and adds weight to what occurred. You gain insight into the destruction of a family that was experimented on. And at this point in my Resident Evil journey, Umbrella has always been the big bad, but has never been showcased to be this merciless. Seeing what they've done to Lisa Trevor makes them feel inhumane. The story is also a lot more nuanced in its pacing. By the end of the original, it was over-explaining itself. I was overwhelmed, even though I knew what was to come. And to that, I never found the new content to be shoehorned in. Instead, it all felt organic to me. And the same can be said for the combat. The additions the remake introduced was fantastic and never took away from the original. Instead, it made it more tense and enjoyable. Both games have the same ideology of surviving in a cathartic situation, and how you do that is up to you. For example, as I started the remake, I had a knife and a gun early on. I was using the knife and I had to be conservative with my ammo, but despite that, I went in killing everything. But the knife sucked so much ass, I eventually switched to the pistol, and I thought, damn, this is way easier. Why wasn't I doing this from the beginning? Only you get so much ammo and I kept running out of it, and then dying. So I reset the campaign and I knew not to waste my ammo right away. I learned that you had to pick your fights, and I started learning my routes. I killed only the zombies that I needed, and it made the game way easier. Okay, he's dead. He is not getting up from that. Cool, I can save it here then. From there, I thought, man, this is a breeze. I shoot a zombie, and then I stab him, and then I run away. Only, in the remake, some zombies remained. I didn't know why, so I continued playing the game the way I had, and eventually, I noticed some of them changed. But I never put two and two together, so I discarded the thought. And then, as I got past one of these red zombies, as I had done before, it got up and clapped my cheeks. Is it back this way? Yes, yes it is. What do you mean he was weak? Jesus Christ. This game. What the hell did... What the shit? Who is this? Why is he feral? I didn't save it! I didn't save it! Run, Jill, run. Jill, please, 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 please don't die. I felt bamboozled. I only had a knife and a pistol. It scared the shit out of me. These red zombies hit harder and faster, so anytime one was around, I had to get in and get out quickly as possible. It made me more thoughtful if I should kill one zombie over another. Why would I want to suffer like that? And then eventually I learned that you can burn them, only it takes up 2 slots. One for a flask and another a lighter. So the playthrough became a measure of risk and reward. Do I take these items and burn the bodies, or do I risk leaving them and getting jumped later? In the history of Resident Evil, I have never witnessed such a diabolical idea. And I mean that in the most respectful way. This shit was crazy. I loved it. I loved not knowing this was a thing, and outside of the Crimson Heads, the only other addition the remake added was defensive weapons like daggers and stun guns to escape. Otherwise, the remake has better enemy placement and behavior. The original pissed me off because zombies could turn around in a dime when trying to avoid them and having no way to escape. But otherwise, both are essentially the same, and they do well for what they were going for, which is thinking about survival and how you achieve that. One of the best examples is the inventory system. While it has issues like not being able to drop or swap items when full, I actually think the inventory system is fantastic, as strategizing with what I could take and what the plan was every time I stepped in or out of a safe room. I always had to think ahead about how I was going to reach my next goal and what I might need along the way. And this is the first time I played with ink ribbons, and they're great too. It made it so I couldn't save all the time. Only on the PC version you could save whenever you wanted as Jill, as for whatever reason Capcom allowed you to do that. But if I was to do New Game Plus, it would actually then use ink ribbons. Or if I played Chris the first time, it would force me to use ink ribbons as well. But I didn't know that, so as I was playing Jill, I had unlimited saves. Anyway, I know this is a long ass video, but I genuinely have fallen in love with Resident Evil 1 in a way I had never expected. Maybe it was because I had such low expectations and it surprised me. Or maybe I was just in the mood after playing a bunch of other horror games that didn't give me what I wanted. That said, for anyone out there who's never played these games, I highly recommend them. And going through both versions, I won't lie, the 1996 version is harder to recommend, but it's still such a wonderful experience knowing the efforts behind it. That said, videos like this take a very long time to make, and if you like this video, please like, subscribe, and share. It takes an enormous amount of effort. I had to record a lot of new material. Even this stuff is taking very long. Yeah, I don't know when my next review is gonna be, if anyone cares, but like it's gonna take a very long time to find something that's gonna motivate me like how Resident Evil 1 did, because I honestly wasn't gonna do something like this. It was going to originally be a very short video, but because of how much I loved it, I really wanted to find a way to express that. And well, a review was one of those ways, especially with how much I hated it. And now I honestly can't wait to go through 2, and then 2 remake, and then 3. Then 3 remake I heard is not so good, but we'll go through it. I already played 4 remake. I never played the original 4, so I might go through that. And then I think I might just go through the 7, 8 next before going through 2. No, wait, no, you have to play 2. I don't know, I'm yapping. And I also ended up loving that one too.